Thank you, Sarah, for your time. Thank you for your generosity to be here today. Okay, we will start. Sarah Morris was born in 1967 in England, in the town of Kent, I remember. And actually, she's living and working in New York. Education, she went to the Brown University, 1989 to 85 to 89. Whitney Museum Independent Study Program, 89 to 1990. Berlin Prize Fellow at the American Academy in Berlin in 1999. And she won the John Michel Foundation Painting Award in 2001. I'm going to go through roughly for some of the collections that has public collection that hold works of Sarah Morris, like Centre Pompidou, Dallas Museum, Fondation Louis Vuitton, the Guggenheim. Of course, we have one important one from 1989. In the presentation, the Tate Modern, then some of the solo exhibition she made, at Palais de Tokyo in 2005, Fondation Bayelleri in 2008. And she made a lot of film exhibitions that we're gonna go through the presentation. So Sarah, let's start. You were born in England. When did you move to New York? What year?
Well, I was born in England, but I only lived there for about 18 months, less than 2 years. My mother's American, my father's British. So we moved, we were always going to move back to the United States. That wasn't sort of a question, but I have 2 passports. But I came back to the United States probably in '69. Yeah, and I didn't come straight to New York. We lived in Rhode Island.
Yeah, perfect.
I grew up in Rhode Island.
So tell me about the when you started to feel that you want to be an artist, and you want to be a painter, you want to be a filmmaker.
All right. Well, I mean, there's 2 answers to that question. I mean, the first answer is when I was studying, I was obviously reading a lot, and I was around a lot of really interesting kids, and most of them made film. You know, most of my friends wanted to be filmmakers, and the department I was in at Brown, everybody wanted to be a filmmaker. Everybody wanted to be sort of famous. And I didn't make any films when I was at Brown, but I was in other people's films. But I just sort of read a lot. I think there was a time when I was at Brown where I realized that I definitely was gonna continue in art. I was always making paintings, even when I was in high school. But the short answer to that is probably when I was 3. I remember my parents taking me to New York City. I remember being very excited to go to the museums. I mean, it's like a very concrete memory that I have before I went to New York. And that was definitely less than 3. I was super excited. I definitely felt like New York was the future. Sort of funny to say that right now because of COVID sort of slowing everything down. But at that moment, whatever year that was, I guess it had to be like around 1970. I looked in the mirror and I remember my parents were packing the car for New York, and I remember thinking, I'm heading to my future.
I've been living in New York until 1 year ago for 5 years. And also I lived there in the 90s. So tell me, where is your studio now? And I know that you have a big one. It's on the 42nd Street or something like that.
No. My first studio was on 42nd Street in Times Square. That's because it was like extremely cheap. And there was one building in Times Square where everybody had studios. It was like a 6-story building. And that's where my first studio was. My studio now is in Long Island City, which is across the river.
Yeah.
And I go there every day when I'm in New York. And I'm not in New York right now. I go there every day and I work. I paint and I'm making films. I mean, basically, there's always so many different things happening in the studio in any single day. It's impossible to say. It's not like some days I just paint, or some days I'm just working on the films. Most days I'm working on everything all at the same time.
Yes. Sarah started to go to the different series of painting you made in your career, and you still keep going. You mentioned that your first studio was in Times Square. One of the paintings from the cities of Midtown, I think the name of the painting is Times Square.
Well, there's a series, one of my first well-known series is called Midtown. Yeah. I did not paint that in my studio in Times Square, but it was sort of a retinal after image of my experience in that studio, which I absolutely loved. I loved being in Times Square. It was super exciting. It was really loud. It was really dirty. It was also sort of repulsive because, you know, right around the corner, there were all the corporations, you know, on 6th Avenue, which was super clean. You know, like there was this dichotomy between super clean and super dirty. Also, the porn industry was located then on 42nd Street. Of course, Giuliani and Disney cleaned that all up. But that was, that series of paintings, Midtown, I actually made in London. I moved to London in '96 to do a show with White Cube, and I had a studio there for about 6 or 7 years.
I think that the images we are seeing now, maybe it's the White Cube exhibition, no?
No. I mean, the first Midtown exhibition I did was at Friedrich Petzel in New York.
Ah, yes.
But I made the paintings in London.
Okay.
So sometimes there's a bit of a delay between coming up with an image, you know, or a composition or a series, an idea. I think of it, I'm thinking of it at the time. I definitely was thinking of it when I was in Times Square, but I didn't do it till a few years later.
Since we are starting with the first of the series, the Midtown, tell me a little bit, tell us a little bit about what is the inspiration about the buildings are your inspiration, but at the same time, I've been reading about some of your interviews that you say, okay, I'm inspired in the building, but then my painting is totally different, has their own life besides the building itself. And also I want to know, you use on a specific kind of painting that is very glossy. I would like to know if you use that in order also to reproduce the luminosity of the buildings when are taken by the sun or the light of the day or something. That's why you use that kind of glossy painting, or
you have to remember, I'll answer this sort of technical question first. The technical question of like, why do I paint with this sort of paint I use? 2 reasons. I use like an enamel paint that's from Holland, but I mean, when I first started, I just used Benjamin Moore paint. I just used household paint. Why? Because there was a tradition, an American history of just using hardware store elements, from Frank Stella to many others. Secondly, you have to remember, I didn't go to art school, so I didn't really know how to do anything. I taught myself. I mean, I took a couple of classes at Rhode Island School of Design, RISD, and also at Brown, but I had to teach myself how to paint. So I used sort of these elemental materials. In terms of glossy surface, I mean, this is just part of the, society we live in. So of course I used glossy. I mean, that I would prefer a glossy surface than a matte surface. Of course, there's a, in the paintings, there's both high gloss and also matte. But this is part of the sort of capitalist aesthetic, as you would say.
Yeah.
But those paintings, for me, of course, they were inspired by not so much, I mean, of course, physically, viscerally, they are buildings, they are places, they have addresses, they have location to them. But it's more than that. It's like a psychology. For me, making those images of the Midtown paintings, Madison Square Garden, Viacom, Chase Bank, Alliance Capital. I mean, I can go through the top. Payne Weber with neons, Revlon Corporation. Those paintings were inspired by an idea that we are complicit in a web of corporations. And it was clear to me that this is where the artist is situated. It's not even a question of everybody is situated, but there's a tendency in art, or it seemed to me, that the artist was always dealing with the marginal or the abject. A lot of people were, and so I was much more interested in the idea of the artist positioning themselves right in the middle of things, right in Times Square, right in the mainstream. Now, of course, there's also a tradition of that too, from Warhol to Richter to, I mean, there's Koons. There's a number of people who've done that, but there is this sort of vying, almost like a battle in the art world between these two sort of forces of the marginal and the abject, and then the mainstream. And I was really interested in this first body of work. I was really interested in positioning myself in this sort of almost monopolistic. It's even become more so now, if you really think about it. The titles have all changed of the companies, but it's the same thing. It's, we have a sort of monopolistic, you know, there's a monopolistic sort of web of power, and we're complicit with it. I mean, we're outside it. I mean, at any moment in time, I'm complicit with it, and I'm also resistant to it. And I think most people flicker in between these two states. And so this is interesting. So you end up with a psychology or a landscape, in this case, a physical landscape of the painting or of the building, where you're flickering between two different states of power. Are you subject to the power, or are you empowering it? And that sort of dichotomy or ambivalence is, I think, present in most of my work.
Sarah, why you choose the front of the buildings as an inspiration? Why you use geometry? Because maybe you couldn't have do the same in a figurative way or something.
Well, no, I had rejected anything like way before I made these paintings. I mean, this isn't the first series of paintings I made. I made a series before these, which were the text paintings, which were just, that's when I sort of really learned how to paint. Those paintings were rolled, meaning like I just sort of rolled the paint onto the canvas. The canvases were vertical when I made those paintings. Those paintings were really inspired by the noise and the adrenaline of the city, and also of the tabloid news and the strength of sort of the voice. Like, if you think of the news as a voice or as a mouth, the voice of tabloid news. So the early paintings, which I don't know if you're going to show here, but is like liar, guilty, and so forth. They were sort of extracts of the news and pop psychology. So, I mean, I wasn't so much interested in the facade the way you're saying. I mean, obviously people hang an idea about my work with this idea of architecture. And of course, architecture plays a role, but only so much as what it symbolizes, you know, only so much as what it is, what the meaning it is carrying within it, what the building actually does, you know. I'm not just interested in the Department of Water and Power in Los Angeles. It's because the Department of Water and Power in Los Angeles controls the whole economic platform of Los Angeles, because of course there's no water in Los Angeles, and this is what Robert Towne's famous film Chinatown is all about, is about the water, which is about the power. So, you know, going back to architecture, it's like I'm only interested in architecture in so much that it can tell a story. As for why I didn't do figurative, I mean, I don't know, I just rejected it really early on as being sort of like, there's just too many directions. And I just thought it wasn't interesting. The artists that I really liked, which was like Judd, Warhol, Brodtars, Richter, all led me to the belief that going in a more subjective direction would be the wrong thing. I also went very early on. You might know, but I worked for Jeff Koons really early on. When I came to New York, I sort of invented a job for myself with him. And I also went to the studio of Liechtenstein pretty early too. So it was never a question. I mean, I did make some work that was painted in a different style way before this series, way before the tech series. And I think I destroyed most of that work. Yeah.
You recall in the 70s, you started with this series that is really related with the architecture of the cities. And in the 70s in United States, there were some artists also trying to use some icons, like you recall Alan D'Arcangelo, maybe. Alan D'Arcangelo also used like the signs, the red lights, or the signal turn right, turn left, like in a mix of geometry and pop. Also, in some way, trying to make a critique about the capitalism of the society, or mixing the pop with the geometry.
Well, definitely, I was really interested in Richter and Polka very early on because of this use of yeah, you could say, and Warhol too, the use of sort of powerful images from the mainstream. You might call it, you know, consumer images, as you said, pop, but also Judd too. I mean, his language was very strongly industrial and strongly part of the industrial age, and almost automotive at times, or at least of the machine. I really love this idea of using these sort of, trying to use this vocabulary and using it for my own purposes, but obviously it all goes back to the social dialogue, the social talk. Yeah.
I like, we're gonna keep going. I like when I collected the painting we have in the collection. The style you work is sending a message behind the geometry. It's not just a couple of lines. There is a lot of composition. There is the people will know later, but when we keep following, but we start to say that at the same time you make a series of painting, you create a film about the series too, because you made a film
Not always. It's not always parallel, but in many cases it is. I mean, the first film started.
You said the two faces of the same coin.
Yes, two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
I mean, as I said, I was around a lot of friends of mine who were making films all the time, or at least, I don't know, every month or whatever, they were shooting films. It was normal that I thought cinematographically about this, because I studied film. I was super interested in the history of film. I watched tons of films way before I even went to Brown. I mean, I watched so much TV. I watched so many films. I mean, I really watched a lot of TV. So, and they would show films on TV all the time. So for me, the idea of making a film really early on was something I always wanted to do. I always viewed film as a form of propaganda for my work. I wanted to make a film. I was invited to be in a show at the Ludwig Museum in Cologne, Germany. I asked them for money to make the film. the Midtown film. They gave me the money. They gave me some money, I believe, not all of the money. They gave me some money to make the film, enough to get it going. And I hired a news crew to go out with me in New York for one day. And that's Midtown, that's the film Midtown. And in a way, making that film set up a methodology for all the other films, which was the following: to use reality. You don't have to alter reality. Reality is interesting enough. You don't have to do anything fictional. Like, it's all there already, you know? So it's a form of cinema verite, if you will, but it was like just using existing forms. If there's a woman on the street smoking a cigarette in high heels, I use that. If there's a banker on the phone doing a deal, I use that. If there's a movie star punching himself in the face on a set, I use that. I mean, I just sort of use existing forms. That's what I do. And Midtown sort of started that. What I did with Midtown is I just had a clipboard and I made not a brief, but I had, like, if you want to call it, like, points in the city. I had a map, and these were the spots I wanted to hit in a single day. And we, like, you know, it was difficult to hit all the spots in Midtown that I wanted to hit, but we filmed. And another important thing from that first film is that crew, the news crew, because they're quite logistical and practical, as opposed to film crews who are used to doing 1 or 2 takes a day. You know, like, news crews are used to a certain pace, and that pace also became my methodology of doing an infinite amount of shots. Later on, I will edit down from those, like, let's call them situations. I use different situations for my work to reference what it is that interests me, what it is that the paintings are trying to strive towards, and basically creating like a dialogue between the paintings and the films. It's not linear. It's not like the films inform the paintings or the paintings inform the films. It's back and forth and back again.
Yeah. Yeah, what surprised me when I saw your first film years ago, even before I collected the Sony painting, is if I never knew about your paintings and I just saw your films, and I say I never could have realized that you will be a geometric artist. But watching both things together and reading about your work and the meaning behind your work makes a lot of sense, the kind of movie you did. So let's keep moving to the next one, so we have time to discuss a little more. This is the second series. It's the Los Angeles building. Mainly you've been inspired for the corporate buildings in LA. This exhibition was in Germany. So tell me about this one that is like a second part of the Midtown, but it's totally different because come up.
Yeah. It's much more kaleidoscopic. The Los Angeles series, yes. That show was at the Kestner Gesellschaft in Germany. Those paintings are, well, okay, I'll take it from left to right. That's Endeavor, which is a huge talent agency in LA. Sony, which is in the middle, that's Department of Water and Power. Endeavor. Yeah, People's Bank. So there's banks thrown in there too. There's money thrown in there too. There's vitamins.
And this is Sony.
And this is Sony.
This is hanging at the museum in Buenos Aires, and the guy you see in the picture is Joy Houston. That I'm quite sure you know him. He made Optic Nerve in Columbus Museum years ago.
Excellent.
So tell me a little bit about this area.
Well,
it's
the
more,
Los
it's
Angeles series,
more complex.
Yeah, I mean, the Los Angeles series, I mean, I've always been, as I said, like, I was always really interested in the history of film and television. Also, not just the history of film. I watched a lot of TV, as I say. So basically, I wanted to make a series at that point, I was thinking very domestically, you know, I mean, in a way, Los Angeles is domestic, it's American, but it's also an export, right? It's an idea that's shipped around the world, Los Angeles and Hollywood for that matter. So I wanted to make my own mental map of Los Angeles, of various paintings, buildings, places, people. And I started a big map in my studio that were only names. I wish I could show you an image of the studio then. That was on 28th Street, that studio. And it had a list of names of people who I needed to speak with to make the work, to make the film. And also, you know, I was making the paintings at the same time. And one of the people who helped me the most with the Los Angeles film was a guy named Sid Ganis, who was at Sony. So that's how the Sony painting came about. Sid Ganis became the president of the Motion Picture Association, that is the Oscars. And so I called Sid Ganis through a collector of mine named Jake Bloom. And Jake gave me his number. I left a message for Sid, and he knew what I wanted to do, which is I wanted access to the Oscars in 2004. I wanted to have a 35mm camera shooting the Oscars, both the pre-production of the event itself. And he left a message on my studio machine, which was really funny. Now, this is somebody who produced Bonnie and Clyde, of an older generation from the 70s. He immediately said on the answering machine, there was a recording saying, "You're right, it is a secret society, and I'll give you all the access you want." So he was also, of course, a producer, executive producer at Sony. And that's sort of how, I mean, that was the linchpin of the Los Angeles film, is being able, I mean, if you think of a city as an onion, like the center of the onion is the Oscars. So for me, getting access to that at that moment was critical. And that was sort of the objective, one of the objectives. I mean, I had many objectives, but that was, without that mainstream moment, the rest, the other moments, the aspirational moments, the moments of failure within the city, because I'm always interested in this concept of failure. I mean, you can look at the city, you can look at my work as dealing with these capitalist forms, which of course it is wrestling with, but it always, underneath it all, is this sort of concept of failure, the failure of this system. And so without the thing that represents success, you can't have the failure, right? So this was really important that I gained access to that and was able to shoot what I wanted to shoot on the red carpet.
You've been a lucky person. What do you can
it's not luck.
About in
it's
special
persuasion.
Yeah, I know.
Art is about art really, I mean, part of art is, of course, you know, making things and struggling with the act of making things. The other half of art is like the act of persuasion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Have you met the son of Robert Mangold, that is a movie director?
No.
Ah.
No.
Okay, and son in particular, that is the work of the collection. I was of course, at the time I bought it, I saw that it's part also of the guide, Contemporary Art #1 is in the Baylor Foundation book. It has something in special for you, this work?
What, Sony?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I just told you, it's like, you know, Sid Ganis from Sony and the whole dialogue. I mean, I had to call Sony about 200 times while I was making the film. So it does have super importance because of this issue of access, but also when I grew up and watched all this TV that I'm telling you about, watching all these films, TV, my American grandfather used to go to Florida every winter. And when he would go to Florida from December to March, he would give me his Sony TV. And his Sony TV was like really small. You could carry it with like a handle. And it, of course, it had this, I think it was red, green, blue. It was called Trinitron. It was a logo. Yeah, it was a logo that was on the Sony TV set. So this TV set and I had a relationship, and it was a formative one.
Yes, in fact, you used the colors in the painting too. So
Definitely.
let's move the next one, the John Hancock series. Tell us a little bit about this series so we can keep moving to the last one that I like a lot.
This is like, see, this is a series that's not really related to a film. I was commissioned by Penny Pritzker in Chicago to make a film in Chicago, and I spent a lot of time in Chicago. I love the John Hancock Center. It's a great building because it looks like a caterpillar. It looks like an organic creature. I also love Chicago because of the whole history of Mies van der Rohe. Yeah. Basically a German guy going to Chicago and making the icon of America, yeah, the icon, which is the skyscraper.
Yeah.
But going back to the John Hancock building is the first commercial multi-use building in America. I mean, officially of that scale. I'm sure there were multi-use buildings prior to that, but it's considered one of the first developments of the idea of like a building that's residential, commercial, etc. That's a skyscraper.
Yeah, for me, it's the most lovely city in America. Talking about architecture.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Super beautiful. And always I said, has the best of New York without having the worst of New York, because it's smaller, but it's so beautiful, so beautiful.
Also, they like New York, they love art.
Yeah, yes. The Art Institute in Chicago, everything is beautiful there. So just on a small picture of Bye Bye Brazil, let us know something about this exhibition.
Okay, this is an exhibition in London at White Cube in 2013.
Yeah.
This is a series of paintings from the Rio series of paintings.
Now you made a movie also.
I made a movie too. Yeah, I made a movie too. I think I shot the movie in 2012, maybe 2011. I don't know. I was like going to Brazil.
After that, we have the poster and we're going to talk about the movie a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I love Rio. I've been going to Brazil since 1995. I have one of my best friends grew up in Rio. And so I was lucky enough to be invited there for Christmas in 1995. That was the beginning of a long history of going there. And also, you have to understand, there's also a big Brazilian community in New York. And that group I knew very well. But I also was like, you know, I was introduced to Caetano Veloso. I mean, I was aware of the political history of Brazil and aware of the contribution artistically through a number of people. And it always fascinated me. It always fascinated me. I don't know. I mean, to have a dictatorship for 21 years and also produce that music and produce that work was.
I remember you made a statement about Oscar Niemeyer also.
Did I?
Yes.
What did I say?
Something like a city made by a man with the form of a woman, something.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty outrageous now. I mean, Oscar Niemeyer wouldn't really be allowed to exist right now, you know? It would be viewed as completely outrageous, what he talked about and what he tried to do. It was really interesting meeting him. I remember when I was making the Rio film, before I made the film, the gallery I work with in Brazil had set up an interview with Globo. And I had the interview with Globo before I shot the film, which was a bit of a mistake. But anyhow, I did the interview. And they asked me everything I wanted to film. And I said, I wanted to shoot Oscar Niemeyer, but it had not been secured yet. And the writer turned to me and said, well, you know, he's really sick. And I said, I don't care if I shoot him, you know, in whatever form, if I shoot him with his nurses, it's no problem. But basically, when I met him, he was completely fine. He was super intense person and very alert and definitely very aware of my work and what he was getting involved with. We met at the office. He was with his staff at his desk. And it was, it's a sort of intense moment in the film, because he is sort of presiding over this idea of the image of Brazil, the future of Brazil, and also the past. I mean, his past is very interesting. He talked to me about, he regretted not having traveled enough. I think he might have had, I'm not sure, but you might know better. I think he must have had a phobia about traveling. He told me that he had one regret in life, and that was not going to New York enough and not traveling enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so this was really interesting to me to hear regret from somebody. I mean, he must have been 101 when I met him. And he was telling me that. That's definitely one regret I do not have. I usually, I mean, not at the moment with COVID, but I'm usually traveling quite a lot. In fact, you could look at my films and my production in general. I mean, the art world is quite international, as you know, but my films, after I sort of made this, you know, I made a film Midtown, I made Los Angeles, I made a film in Miami, I shot a film in Washington, D.C. called Capital when Clinton was ending his administration. When I felt strong enough, I guess I started to make films abroad. I started to make, I mean, I made 1972, which was shot in Munich, about the Munich Olympics, before I made the Beijing film. When I made the Beijing film after the Los Angeles film, it sort of blew my mind, because you have to understand, I was like a New York artist. I had gone, yes, I had gone to London, but that's like a small step. I had gone to Berlin because I had a studio for a year in Berlin. That was maybe another step of making work anywhere. I realized I could make work anywhere. This was a really important thing, because I had many colleagues and friends in New York who were sort of stuck in New York. Like once you're in New York, you get this like slaves of New York mentality that you can't leave, you can't get out. And it's obviously, it's a lie. Of course you can. Of course you can make work anywhere. But when I started to make work, you know, when I came up with the idea after the Los Angeles film, in dealing with all these egos and dealing with the film industry and the aspirational sort of ethereal quality, if you will, of Los Angeles, as my friend Robert Evans, the producer, used to say, and after he spoke about my film when I showed it at CAA in, I think, 2004, 2005, he said, most of Los Angeles is out of work. You know, like the reality is it's this sort of myth making machine. But after that, you know, one city leads to the next city, right? So when I was thinking about, even when I was in Los Angeles, I knew I was going to Beijing. Like I was already on the next place. I mean, I was dealing like, you know, I was battling with this, as I say, egos, and my own ego too. But I knew that I was already going to deal with this idea of like the nation state, this like hyper-capitalist country, which is China. And I decided I would make the film, and I actually started to set that film up quite not long after, because I don't know at what point the Beijing Olympics were announced. I don't know when that was announced, but I knew it when I was shooting Los Angeles that that was where I was next gonna go. So when, you know, the order of things in my work makes, there's always a lot of thought about the order of things. I mean, I might have 5 or 6 ideas at a time, but the order of things is very important, right? Because leads you through an experience, it changes your vocabulary, and then you're at a different place with your work and yourself.
Sarah, let's move a little quicker. We have 15 minutes more or less. Until all the series we have seen before, you were more related with architecture. In this new series that I'm in love, I saw the first time in YQ, one of them. You added the music, the rhythm.
Yes.
Of course, the facade.
Not music, although I like that idea too. Voice.
In some way, the facade of the buildings has some rhythm also, and you can find.
You can see this idea of even in the early work, whether they're the text paintings, which are like guilty, liar, mental. I mean, this has an adrenaline in it, and it has a volume. The city has a volume that's sometimes really annoying. Sometimes it's super exciting, right? It has a volume, it has a frequency. Also, I made a sculpture really, really early on, which probably nobody really knows about, which was in 1991. I made a sculpture, which is a police radio. It was called Realistic Pro 35, and it picked up various stories going on around the city. So in this work that you're showing, Flicking to the Future, this work is from, I started doing it about 2 or 3 years ago. This is the Sound Graph series, and this is all based on speech, whether my speech or, in the particular case of this painting, Alexander Kluge's speech. I made a film in, I guess, 2017 called Finite and Infinite Games. And I was looking for a voice. I wanted to cast a voice, a male voice, a sort of Wizard of Oz voice, if you will. I was thinking of Werner Herzog. I ended up rejecting that because I thought his voice was sort of too overexposed and too comic. I ended up using the voice of Alexander Kluge, which I thought was much more poetic and softer, and also his history in Germany of having done so many different roles fascinated me. But I had him read a speech that I wrote, and we used the backdrop of the Philharmonic space in Hamburg as the location of that speech. And the speech is a warning, interestingly enough. The speech was a warning about where we think society is headed, right? So, I mean, you look at these paintings, they're sort of part of them are from that speech that I wrote. And when I say I wrote, I didn't write it all. It was partly cobbled together from the book Finite Infinite Games by James P. Carse, which is about game playing and about navigating through basically your sort of system of navigation through social space, or I mean, all space, you know, like your personal space, your political space, your social space. How do you navigate? How do you navigate right now? And right now, the way you navigate is exactly what I'm doing. You use your voice, right? You use your voice. The voice has become more and more important.
Okay, we're gonna move a little faster, so maybe we have the chance to a couple of questions before. So now we are moving to some site specific.
Yeah.
This is at the Kunsthalle in Zurich. I think this area is Midtown or...
Yeah, that's from the Las Vegas series. That's a painting called Rum Jungle that was commissioned by the Kunsthalle Zurich.
Then
Robert Town.
House in New York.
I love that piece.
You had some dinner at the Lever House?
I've gone to dinner there.
It's pretty, yeah?
Yeah, I think we had the opening party for this painting, which was like 50,000 square feet painting. I mean, it went from 53rd Street to 54th Street. The whole block, the bottom of that building called Lever House. This was the first public space in Manhattan.
I know because
they did it.
My office is 1 block from there, the Jeffries building.
Oh yeah. Well, this was a really important building for New York politically, because after this building, which SOM did in the 50s, they made it mandatory for skyscrapers to have public space. But you have to remember that Leverhulme and Seagram's did it, they just did it. You know, it was like viewed as, you know, it's a bit Jacques Tati. Yeah. I mean, you think there should be a subway entrance, there's no subway entrance. You think there should be a restaurant, there's no restaurant. You think you should be able to cut through, you cannot. Anyway, this was like a perfect place to do an artwork.
And full of Andy Warhol portraits inside. Okay, Palais de Tokyo, that is a beautiful installation.
That is gorgeous. I think it's still there in the wall.
Unbelievable. This was the Fondation Bayeler in Switzerland.
Yeah, that looks like the plan for it. That doesn't look like an image. Yeah. That was called
this is a quite famous one, Hornet.
That's in Düsseldorf, yes.
Yeah. I like this one a lot. It's on
actually, you know, the House of Commons in London Parliament just asked if they could use those images. I like them because it's a little bit warlike. And the subways in England, you know, were used in World War II.
This is Gloucester Station in London. People watching.
I did 19.
I like this a lot in Montreux.
Yeah, I like the little train.
Oh my God. Look at the colors.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. This is at the convention center last year.
That's right. That's now a hospital, by the way.
Yes, I know. Okay, and we go through the films roughly. So this was one of the first movie you made, the Midtown, that belongs to more or less the same, related with the same series of painting Midtown. You already talked about that. I like the posters you've been doing.
Yeah, that was designed by Peter Saville, that first one.
Yeah, you did some of them in collaboration with others. But at your beginning, you've been also a graphic designer, no?
No.
No?
No, that's false.
Okay.
I love graphic design. I love the history of graphic design, just like I love the history of film.
Yes, mostly of the geometric artists in the 50s, the 60s, even before were graphic designers too. So that one was at the MoMA, Project 77. This is the film poster of the movie LA, Beautiful True. This is the film Beijing that I've been reading that you have access to also to the Olympic Games. So tell a little bit, just a little bit, 1 minute about your experience.
So I mean, you can sort of define making art as solving problems. I mean, that's basically what an artist is doing real time, continually. My work is almost like a diagram of a headache. To make this film was absolutely, it took me to Switzerland, actually, interestingly enough, to get access to shoot in those positions at the games and be there for the rehearsals and also the opening night of the ceremonies meant I had to have not the permission of anybody in China. It meant I had to have the permission of the IOC. So they said no to me about 4 times. And I went to Zurich for an opening of a friend. And I got on a train and I just decided, like, I made an appointment. I convinced them to have a meeting with me to explain to me why they said no. And so I went to Lausanne to have a meeting with the IOC. And then after that meeting, they changed the no into a yes. And that meant I could, you know, place my camera where I wanted to during the games and the opening ceremonies. And there was so much security and it was so difficult. And actually, when I did get over there with my crew to get all of the credentials, like you get this pass that was actually, the pass was an infinity symbol that we had on the van and we had on us that allowed us to go anywhere. And I like that idea because I think that's quite similar to what a proper artist should do, is basically go wherever the hell they want.
Sarah, we will watch the last few slides, and I want to, just to close, I want to make you a question. So these are other ones, points of on a line. I like the posters. All of the posters are beautiful. This is the film Rio. This is amazing. Also, Falls Never Breaks. This is in China. It was a film festival or something, no?
No, this is a show at the UCCA in Beijing. This was 2 years ago, 2018. Yeah, those are huge LED screens.
Sarah, you are almost a New Yorker. Even your accent is a New Yorker. After I've been living there for many years. My question is, are you considering yourself as a politically engaged artist?
That's a difficult question, but I mean, I think any really good artist is politically engaged. It's impossible not to be, you know? I can't, how could you possibly be divorced from the reality you're living under? I mean, any really good artist, I'm not saying there aren't people who, you know, I would even argue that Cy Twombly is a political artist, but you know, in the poetics of his gesture and of his movement and what that gesture means, I would have to say yes. Okay, because as you know, this is a difficult year everywhere, but in the United States, it's an important year, having a lot of problems, all problems that never get fixed. And it's an election year too. So that's why sometimes hopefully it's the you know, silver lining of COVID, frankly. I mean, there has to be something good that comes out of this. Yes, I hope so. Okay, thanks a lot for your time again. Let's ask Juan, do you have any question from the people, the attendants?
Yeah, Sarah, we have a couple of questions. One question is from Ella Fontanals. She wanted to know if the Midtown Warner Bros. Building work it's Midtown Warner Bros. Building 1999 was made in London. Yes, the Midtown work was made in London. Excellent. Luciana Levinton is asking, do you know and are you interested in Atos Bulcao? Yeah, I am interested, of course. He's very, like him, Burle Marx, Niemeyer, you know, Lina Babardi, those Brazilian, it's like a huge force in Brazil. So yes, absolutely. Okay, I don't have more questions. I have a lot of comments. We will share them with you later because it was not only issued by Zoom, we are at the same time in YouTube. And YouTube it's surprising me, it's a very powerful tool. We have 2 times more people in YouTube than here. So we will share with you later the comments from both networks.
Okay, Sarah, again, thank you so much for your time. I know that today is 4th of July. We are in holiday. I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate your everything you explained to me. For us, Sony is one of the most important painting we have in the collection. Well, I love that painting. Yeah, we love it too. And as a small comment, I remember when we brought that painting to the museum in 2012, after I bought it in London. You are so professional in everything. You think everything, because it was very difficult to put the painting inside the museum for the size. It's almost 3 meters by 3 meters. And the stretch you build for that painting everything is in aluminum. Even it's so complex, the system, that you can move part of it. It's so heavy. Yes, I mean, there's a story behind the stretchers. I did design the stretchers. I designed the stretchers because when my studio was in Berlin, there was a guy who made all of my stretchers in wood, and the stretchers bowed. Yeah, the wood
wood bent. So I realized I had to solve this problem.
With that size and the heaviness of the painting will be impossible to have a wood stretch. But it's like an engineer stretch because you can slide also.
It's slightly deceptive, right?
Yeah.
I like that idea.
Okay, thank you so much.
Like a Trojan horse.
And I hope to see you soon in New York. I will visit your studio, and let's keep in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me
today. Thank you. Thank you to everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.